I'll get things underway. As always, I would like to begin with an acknowledgement of country. Before the event begins, we acknowledge that today we are meeting virtually on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We recognize their continuing connection to the land and waters and thank them for protecting this coastline and its ecosystem since time immemorial. We pay our respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to all First Nations people present today, and of course to the lands on which people might be tuning in from. This is an event that is presented by it's organized by the Department of Chinese Studies at the University of Sydney. My name is Josh Denberg. I'm a senior lecturer in that department in collaboration with the China Studies Center at Language, Literature, Culture, and Education Cluster. And we thank Yanping Zhang very much for the technical support today. And also organized by the Australian Society for Asian Humanities and the Faculty of Art, Design, and Architecture at UNSW. I'd especially like to thank the speaker, Xuefei Shi, who is currently an affiliated researcher in the department, and it's been a cause of regret that we haven't been able to meet more than once in person while he's been affiliated, but we're thankful to all of you for joining us today for his presentation. Now I will hand over to Dr. Minerva Inwald to introduce the speaker.
Thanks, Josh. My name is Dr. Minerva Inwald. I'm the Seminars Officer for the Australian Society for Asian Humanities and Judith Nielsen Postdoctoral Fellow in Contemporary Art at the University of New South Wales. We're very happy to have our speaker today, Dr. Xuefei Shi. Dr. Shi is a postdoctoral researcher in the ERC project Transocean at the Christian Michelsen Institute in Norway, and currently an affiliated researcher in the Department of Chinese Studies at the University of Sydney. His research looks into the mobilities of Chinese fishermen and fishing communities in the Indian Ocean, in particular Madagascar. With a PhD in development studies from Radboud University in the Netherlands, he has extensive fieldwork experience in East Africa conducted over the past decade. So can we all welcome Dr. Shi, who is going today present a paper, Chinese Heritage in the Indian Ocean, a cultural anthropological perspective. So I'll hand over now to Dr. Shi.
Thank you. I'll start to share my screen first. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank Josh and Minerva for the organization of today's talk. The Department of Chinese Studies here in USYD generously offered me this visiting opportunity. Though we are back now, we are now back to lockdown again, but I was still able to find a few materials from the library in the university that are quite relevant to my topic today. The information I'm going to present in the following hour would not be complete without research in USYD. So very much appreciated. The topic today, Chinese heritage in the Indian Ocean, is actually a very preliminary background study of my postdoc research Transocean, where I work as where I work now remotely. In this project, so we investigate how individuals and groups of fisher communities from Asia modify their activities as state and non-state agents, and as poachers and traders and smugglers. We study how these Asian mobilities interact and clash with those in Africa and Oceania. And we try to develop a new theoretical and methodological model where mobile maritime actors explore their networks and pursue transoceanic expansion. So my role in the postdoc research studies the transoceanic Chinese fishermen across the Indian Ocean to the great island of Madagascar in historical and contemporary contexts. These fishermen's mobility in history was closely connected to the general Chinese migrants in the region, especially the indentured Chinese labor. While doing this background investigation and plus my field research before in East Africa, I am able to reconstruct Chinese heritage space and its social and development connections to the greater transnational Chinese world. So my institute, Christian Michelsen Institute in Norway, is an independent research institute established in 1930, named after the country's founding prime minister. So its research mainly focuses on developing countries. So back to the topic today, I didn't combine all the materials I possessed on the old Chinese migrants in Africa into a general framework until in 2018, I participated in a museological project commissioned by the Foshan municipal government in Guangdong province, China. The aim of this museological project was to gather the sporadic info of Foshan migrants around the world, especially the prominent ones. People from Foshan have been quite proud of the achievements of their migrants. For example, Bruce Lee and his teacher, Yap Meng, also known as IP Man, and the spread of the authentic Cantonese culture from the city. For example, the Lao dance and the Canton opera. So what the project would be interested, I would be more interested today are people like this girl here, Gronia Somerville, an Australian Olympic badminton player who claims to be the granddaughter of Kang Youwei, a late imperial reformist from Foshan City. The project was among the larger movement of building new migrant museums in major Chinese immigrant cities. In Guangdong province only, we can further divide the globalized Cantonese migrants into 4 big groups. The first one is 3 counties, Nanhai, Panyu, Shunde, also known as Sanyi, which is around the capital city of Guangzhou and its adjacent Foshan city, and also 5 counties, Heshan, Xinhui, Kaiping, Xinning, Enping, Taishan, they are now all belongs to the Jiangmen municipality, and also the Teochew area and the Hakka people. All these places have been enthusiastic in new migrant museums as part of their role in the Belt Road initiatives. Understanding this division here is important for the for the previous museological project I participated, and also for my own research, because different groups of migrants and different routes of migrating, and they formed respective dominating all the Chinese societies in different countries. For example, people from Taishan, Taishanese people in the west coast of the United States, the former American ambassador to China, Gary Locke, was from that group. And also those in Thailand, for example, came mostly from Teochew, like the former Prime Minister, the Thaksins. So my role in the museological project covered the migrants to the Indian Ocean and African regions. The ground team of the project went to Mauritius, Madagascar, and South Africa for data collection and interview, combined with the fieldwork carried out in the ancestral villages of these migrants. We are somehow not conclusively able to review a migrating trajectory of these Foshan migrants from home all the way to the eastern coast of Africa, via the South China Sea to the Malay Peninsula, then jumped big to Mauritius, and then split to further coast in Madagascar, Seychelles, Réunion, Mozambique, and South Africa. Previous studies on Chinese migrants in this region mainly focused on Mauritius and South Africa, which Mauritius is dominated by Hakka people. And so we can see from the lower picture here, so the Hakka people, they really did a wonderful job in localizing the first minister of finance of this country, Mo Ling Zhong Achung, is on the country's 20 rupees note here. Splitting from Mauritius, Cantonese-speaking people mainly went to Madagascar, Seychelles, and South Africa, and then later some Hokkien-speaking people, including Teochew and Minnan, joined them on the continent. My first and the major focus is on the Chinese people in Madagascar. The majority of the old Chinese societies there are Cantonese, or more precisely, from 3 particular villages in Foshan city today, with a limited variety of family names. There are 2 possible explanations of their arrival. One as indentured labor imported by the French for construction on the island. Most of the labor workers, however, went back home later. So another possible source of immigration was from the bifurcation from Mauritius after after a bloody turf war between the Hakka people and the Cantonese-speaking people. So the Cantonese lost the war and left to Madagascar. This story can be further reinforced by the fact that the first president of Seychelles, not far from both islands, as shown on the upper right picture here, came from a Cantonese father and British mother. His father came from the exact village of those in Madagascar, a fact never seen in previous reports, but was discovered by our visit in their village temple. So actually, similar stories happened in Australia too, especially in the north. Although these people were later expelled back home, but those in the Indian Ocean societies remained and dominate certain sectors there. For example, import and retail. The lower right picture here shows an advertisement of a Cantonese retailer in Diego Suarez, Madagascar. I got it from the official book commemorating the country's independence in the 1960s. So basically in this book, which I found in the National Library of Australia, this book, on the front, it's the founding president and his cabinet, but on the back, it's the various sponsors of this book, including the French, Indians, and Cantonese who dominate different sectors of the society on the time of the independence. The population of these Cantonese people in Madagascar is controversial. So some say there are like only 10,000, and some say the largest number I ever saw was up to 1 million. So these numbers were actually based on different categorizations. So this I would say this 10,000 number speaks to the core members of this Cantonese society, the old ones, the ones who can still speak in the dialects and who remained their nostalgia along the time. And the 10,000 number speaks to the extended family of these core members. And some of them don't speak Cantonese or Mandarin at all. And some of them even mixed a few times and lost the obvious traits of the Chinese appearance, but they still recognize them as one of the Cantonese, as a member of the Cantonese society, and pay tribute in the temples regularly. But for the 1 million estimation, it's mainly based on the official data of the country's official data of business. So in Madagascar, businesses are divided and registered into into different ethnic categories. So as long as people claim that they are Chinese, then they can register the business as a Chinese one. So so there are also the Indian Pakistani ones and also the European ones. So I would say I accept more the 100,000 estimation, because it makes Madagascar the third largest. It makes Madagascar like the top 3 countries in Africa that hosting Chinese migrants, only after South Africa and the Mauritius. The Cantonese influence in Madagascar society is quite deep. So they brought over lychee culture. Madagascar is now the top 3 lychee producers in the world after China and Thailand. And we can see here, so they even print the lychee on their stamp. And the Cantonese people also brought over their cuisine, which is a very important part of the Madagascar cuisine now. And well, although Madagascar people culturally came from culturally and genetically came from Indonesia, but they don't have the Indonesian fried rice or fried noodle today, like the mee goreng or nasi goreng. Their fried rice and the fried noodle is actually more Cantonese. Also, the Cantonese people, as indentured labor, they brought over trickshaws, huangbaoche. So trickshaws are still being used in Madagascar, especially this, pulled by men. So now I will briefly introduce the theoretical perspectives. I mainly look at the topic from 3 interconnected aspects. The first aspect is museum representations. I mainly borrow the identification of Chinese diaspora museums here from the book here. So especially the idea of an ambivalent heritage. So on the surface, these museums, these migrant museums exhibit the achievements of the migrants only, and the hardship, or maybe also the hardship they endured, but the hardship narrative is used to support the how glorious their heritage and achievements are. So there is also a separate difficult heritage. So this difficult heritage talks about the reasons behind the migration. So why they migrated, why they left the older places. So this is something I guess these museums are not willing to elaborate too much. Then it comes to a more analytical, ambivalent heritage, as the author defines, and I quote here, it refers to something produced and developed in transnational spaces and associated with a high degree of complexity in terms of ownership, of value, and meanings. The interpretation, which involves negotiations between multiple agencies and different perspectives that often go beyond the narrow framework of the nation state. So this concept helps to distinguish the competition in history in the history of Chinese diaspora's interpretation between party-state heritage discourse and their transnational communities. So the second aspect is patrimonialization. It's a process by which material or immaterial elements become a constituent part of a community's identity with meaning and significance. So in our context, it's mainly about how the state today, including local governments, rediscovers and incorporates this forgotten heritage overseas into their actual policy. So the most typical case of patrimonialization in China is the rediscovery or reuse of the Muslim tombs since Song Dynasty in Zheitong, Quanzhou. This site was recently listed as the World Heritage Site too. So we can see from the picture on the upper left. So so it kind of becomes a cultural symbol of the city, and the overseas tourists, Muslim tourists, even when they're for kind of pilgrimage. And so the patrimonialization also involves the exploitation of gene and the memory. So the lower left picture shows a girl from Lamu Island, Kenya, and she and her village claim to be the direct descendants of Admiral Zheng He's fleet. And while some apparently they claim that some sailors left over and then started this village there. So they claim that they had this blood and they had this culture with all these Chinese style utensils. And so the Chinese government at the beginning of the Belt Road Initiative found this village and officially recognized the blood of this girl and sent her to China for study. So as a testimony of the historical involvement of China-African relations. So on the right, it is the former Malagasy ambassador to China, which was interviewed by our ground team in Madagascar. So he came from the, well, his father came from Foshan city, from one of these three villages, and taught his son Cantonese, a specific dialect of Cantonese spoken in that village, and he was so apparently both the Chinese government and the Madagascar government discovered this line. So so including him and also the current Malagasy ambassador to China are all from this village and are all identifying themselves as authentic Cantonese and are trying to connect more Cantonese investment and traders to Madagascar, to their second hometown. The third aspect is necropolitics. So while it involves how people commemorate the dead and how to use this heritage for the living's benefit. So I will illustrate this necropolitics here with a story of two cemeteries in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. So on the left, it's the official cemetery of Chinese experts who died during construction of the Tanzania-Zambia Railway. And so the first country visited by the President Xi Jinping after in his first term was to Tanzania, and there he paid tribute to this cemetery, and this cemetery became quite famous in the Chinese society. But there is another one hidden in a garbage site of Dar es Salaam at the same time. It's the Cantonese cemetery. Cantonese cemetery. It's a Cantonese cemetery that had 20 to 30 Cantonese migrants back to from the time that between 1920s to 1960s. Well, we can see it was like after the last one died there in the 1960s, the cemetery was forgotten. No one took care of it. So it was buried in the it was buried under garbage and surrounded by a Muslim cemetery. So rumor says that there's a monk from Sri Lanka found this cemetery and told the location to the Chinese embassy and the Chinese migrant associations there. So the Chinese associations, especially the Cantonese ones, who claimed to have these provincial connections with this deceased, so they volunteered to clean, to refurbish, and to hire people to guard this cemetery, and also they connected. They contact these deceased, the hometown government of this deceased, and they try to track them down, who they are, who they were, and what are the story, what were the stories. So with the rediscovery of this cemetery, the Cantonese migrant and the Cantonese migrant associations in Dar es Salaam apparently increased their voice and increased their voice among the Cantonese communities and in between them, their relations with the hometown government. So there's also a further aspect I would like to talk. There's the briefly that is the Chinese religions along the coast. So on the left, it's the Guangdong statue rediscovered after 70 years, hidden underground in the National Gallery of Mozambique, name something like that. So it was then rediscovered by a delegation from China, and then on the request of the Chinese embassy and this I would say the sister city of Maputo in China. So they reinstated this Guangdong statue and had a ceremony that grand ceremony that reopened the Guangdi Temple in Maputo for the memory of the old Chinese migration there. So on the right, so there is a Chinese temple operating in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, and I'm not going to elaborate this a lot, but the Chinese people are nowadays trying to connect culturally with all the subgroups on the continent, including Taiwanese and including the older ones, with the common symbol they all recognize, for example, Buddhism. And if you are interested in the story behind the Buddhism expansion in Africa and the story behind the competition, the story of the Taiwanese and the mainland Chinese competition on this Buddhist enterprises, I will give another another talk on 27th of August for a seminar organized by the University of Melbourne on the rewarding Chinese transnationalism, and there, so I will have more pictures and videos to show. So to conclude, this preliminary background project helped us to look at the cultural issues in the globalizing Chinese community, from the so-called official cultural diplomacy, people to people exchange, to the rediscovery of heritage and the reuse of heritage, and it also re-evaluates the neglected role of old Chinese migrant societies in the China-African studies. And more importantly, it helps reorientation from land-focused to an ocean-focused perspective into the study of the global Chinese society. I'll end here. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. What an interesting talk. I'm sure that people have lots of great questions. I invite people to put their questions either in the chat, actually, for this webinar format. Best to put those questions in the chat, and then we'll read them out for our speaker today. I might actually just start off with a question myself while people start putting their own questions in the chat. I'm wondering, I'm very taken with this example of the supposed descendants of the Ming voyages, you know, Zheng He. I'm wondering if, I know in, say, other diaspora communities like the African American diaspora, DNA testing or increased DNA testing is kind of impacting how people think about their heritage. And I'm wondering if there's similar stuff going on in terms of how people are thinking about the Chinese heritage, and if DNA testing is having any impact there.
Yes, they did a DNA test, as I understand, on that girl and maybe on her family. Well, officially they recognize she has the genes, so that's why she was recognized as a Chinese. So that's why she got the scholarship from the embassy, then to China, and the other diaspora Chinese, the apparently the very obvious ones. So she got the same the same status. So but then this story, however, is a bit not so, the evidence is not so strong, and because except the undisclosed genetic evidence, all the other evidence are circumstantial. So like the utensils, and so they say that they have been calling each other Chinese for centuries. So so it's more cultural and it's more political, and you can.
Great, excellent, thank you. So we've got a question from David Goodman, who asks, in other countries, migrants often freeze their customs and language at the point of community departure. Do you have any evidence of this?
Yes, exactly. So these people in Madagascar, these Cantonese people, they came from well, their village belongs to a town called Lecong in Foshan, and so the Lecong dialect, I was told that it was notoriously incomprehensible for the average Cantonese speakers. So these people, they in Madagascar, they phrase their language there like a fossil. So actually, now in Madagascar, there are more people speaking this particular dialect than actually back in China.
Mm. Yeah, so from the linguistic perspective, are there any other customs that are kind of frozen in time in that same way as well?
Customs, I would say, yes. So they have this particular pastries. Well, maybe in our standard, in today's Chinese standard, it's a bit old-fashioned, but they are still making there. And if you have ever had a chance to go to Madagascar, especially to the eastern coast city called Tamatave, where you can see these pastries sold in a very traditional Cantonese bakery.
That's what we always want to know about, is there good food that we can...
Well, I haven't been to Madagascar yet, so I look forward to the field work. Then I will try myself. And
Great, excellent. We've got a question from Josh Stenberg also asking about linguistic patterns and shifts. So Josh asks, can you talk about the linguistic patterns and shifts? For instance, is there a shift first from French and then, for instance, to Malagasy, or is there a revival of Mandarin education that we see in other historic communities? How do Mauritian Creole, French, and English compete among Chinese in Mauritius?
Well, I'm not a linguistic expert, but from what I understand, that let's say Malagasy is not even a dominant language on the island, although it's the official language, but it's only well, the standard form of Malagasy is only spoken by the Central Highland dominating ethnic group, and where most present came. So, but the Central Island government, the Central Highland central government has limited power on the surroundings. So the surrounding they speak various forms of the so-called Malagasy. So Malagasy, I would say it's not a historical language, but more than a standard, a more recently standardized language based on an ethnic group, which is not widely accepted even on the island. So then the elite people on the in Madagascar, they speak more French than Malagasy. Even the president today, so he only practiced his Malagasy after he decided to run. So he speaks much better French than Malagasy. So that's the situations there. So for the Chinese, they are not only the Mandarin speaking, but also the Cantonese speaking. So while they have this traditional Cantonese language education, and nowadays, while they can also go to the Confucius Institute to learn Mandarins, and they speak French too. So they kind of position themselves as a more elite status than the average Malagasy people. So yeah, so so this situation is quite I would say unique in Madagascar. In Mauritius, it's a bit more normal. So so like what we see in other countries, it's creolized. So these people, although they have a very authentic Cantonese name, so but they speak the Mauritian Creole. So yeah, that's what I know.
Great, excellent. Louise Edwards asks, are there any newspapers or magazines from the old Cantonese migrants in Madagascar or in other parts of Africa?
Yes, there are. I guess, because I haven't been to the field yet, but I guess there are one or two remaining in Madagascar and a few remaining in Mauritius, but the others on the continent, or in South Africa, apparently there are a lot, but they are dying out as the old people who were enthusiastic about that died away, right? But the young people, they either not interested or they just didn't speak the languages. So it's a pity.
We've got a question from Paul McGregor who says, thanks, Xue, very interesting paper. Can you comment on the relations between Si, now called Hui, immigrants, and the Sani? The languages and dialects are mutually unintelligible. In Australia, historically, they were often separated communities. Was this the case in the Western Indian Ocean world?
Yes, yes, it is. So for the Cantonese in Madagascar, they mainly came from Foshan or more specifically Shunde, and so it belongs to Sani. And but for example, the people now buried in the cemetery in Dar es Salaam, they actually came from Si or Wi, came from Kaiping or Enping, so something I forgot to mention. So they didn't have, from what I can say, they didn't have any connections with the people in Madagascar. They came to, they went to Tanzania as indentured labor somehow, but because the group was too small and they were quickly forgotten in history. And so, but now, well, I'm not so familiar with the situation in Australia, but because the Chinese population is relatively quite small in Africa, although increasing. So the Cantonese Migrant Association in Tanzania, for example, well, covers the whole range of the different Cantonese groups. So no matter you came from Si or Wi, so you are all Cantonese, and you're one of us.
Yeah, yeah. Great. I'm just going to ask, there's been a request for the link for the registration for the Reworlding Chinese Transnationalism Symposium. Josh, would you mind if you just Google that? I think you can pop that in the chat for anyone who's interested. If there, yeah, so there's a chat function there. So that would be great so that people can follow up on that. Okay, we have a great question from John Lampo Tung, who says, I'm the descendant of Hakka migrants to Mauritius. Our family always said that the Chinese community in Mauritius was roughly 50 50 between Hakka and Cantonese. It would seem from your very interesting presentation that this is not the case. Can you comment on the Chinese language groups in the Mascarene Islands?
Oh, wow. That's a tough question. Now there's an expert here. So yeah, it's true. Well, I would say this identification of being Hakka or being Cantonese, it's not so absolute. So there are like gray zones in between. Well, let's say let me show the screen again.
Yeah.
So we can see from the lower the lower right here, the advertisement. So this guy's name is called Chang. So Chang is a typical. So I guess so. Chang is a typical Cantonese name from maybe from Guangdong or some Foshan. But Zhu is a typical Hakka family. So it's possible this guy is came from a mixed family of Cantonese and Hakka. So nowadays, so for people nowadays, whether being Hakka or being Cantonese, it's more like cultural self-identification rather than blood. So this will be my explanation. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, there's actually another question from Paul McGregor that also asks about the conflict between the Cantonese and the Hakka in Mauritius, and some more details about what era that was or what date.
Yeah, there's an anecdotal story, and it's like I forgot the exact year, but it's between somewhere 1920s to 1940s. But I would say it's anecdotal, so it's never recognized by the official discourse because it's not a good thing. So the official discourse will say that these Cantonese people, they moved on to further places to look for opportunities. But wow, yeah, if you can do a little bit search, you can find the story on internet. Yeah.
Great. I just to follow up on that, I just want to ask, how important is the role of anecdote when you're kind of constructing and I guess oral history when we're putting in the process of putting together this project?
So I would say so the main materials for our project comes from archives and also from interviews based on field work. So that's why we have the initial data, because my main research is on the Chinese fishermen. So, but our initial data was on the general situation of the Chinese migrant in Madagascar there. So, so yes, then they have these stories. So how they migrated from home to Mauritius and the middle point, then to Madagascar. Well, then their occupations varied, including the fishermen and the miners and the construction workers. So yes, so now we have this concrete interview data on the general situations of the Chinese societies there, and we have anecdotal data and anecdotal data on their stories as like a more detailed stories than in different historical backgrounds and in different occupations. So these stories are something I need to verify and to reinforce during my next fieldwork. Hopefully it can be carried out in Madagascar during the lockdown. So yeah, so I would say anecdotal evidence is the starting point of the research, but what we do is to verify them, to theorize them, and to put them into the general framework.
Great, yeah, interesting. Okay, so we have another question from Michael Payton. Has there been any effect of African Chinese on China itself? Australian Cantonese, for instance, had an effect on the modernization of China, such as Vivian Chow in journalism and the Gok brothers in shopping.
Can you repeat the question? It's like Africans born in China?
Yeah, so I guess what, this idea that the diaspora also then affects the homeland as well. So has there been, is there any historical influence of the African Chinese diaspora then back on mainland China historically?
Yes. So for example, the founding, the first Ministry of Finance in Mauritius, well, his Chinese name is Zhu Meiling. Well, they were, well, I would say in general, the Mauritius Chinese are very patriotic, and these people, including Zhu Meiling, they were very supportive to reconnect with the motherland, and from what I understand, even the family of the Zhu Meiling, well, Zhu Meiling died a few years ago, but before in his last years, so he moved his entire family back to China. So so he was doing something like a cultural ambassador between Mauritius and China, and possibly that for more trading and investment relations. And well, but not all the Chinese communities in Indian Ocean societies are like allegiant to mainland Chinese government, but there are also some Taiwanese ones. So especially in South Africa before the change of the diplomat ties. So so there were a few Taiwanese politicians in South Africa, and one of them even became South Africa's ambassador to Taiwan, and he helped to bridge Taiwanese investment to South Africa, hoping that South Africa would become like a new place for Taiwanese factories, blah, 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 and also a Buddhist temple, which is one of the largest in Africa now.
Great. We have a follow-up comment from John Lampo-Tung, who is giving us some more of that great kind of family history evidence. So John says, to respond to an earlier question, my grandparents' generation, early 20th century, were fluent and literate in Chinese, whereas my parents' generation, so that's from the 1920s to the 1940s, were able to speak Hakka, but were frequently illiterate in Chinese. My generation, 1960s onwards, are largely unable to speak Hakka. Some cousins have learned Mandarin, but it's not a language spoken at family gatherings. English and Creole would be the main languages spoken. Do you want to offer a comment on that?
Yeah, well, thank you, John. It's a very good description of these linguistic situations in your family. Yes, I would say this decay of languages is inevitable in these migrant societies, but somehow, because I'm not so familiar with Mauritius, but somehow in Madagascar, these people they managed to keep this this language until the very last generation. But now the new generations, that because of all these phones and things, they are more more inclined to learn English and the French and or Mandarin, but they are not interested in Cantonese anymore.
So we have a question for an anonymous question that asks, the current rediscoverings are interesting and relatively recent. Have you by chance come across any evidence of earlier Chinese ocean-based expeditions to East Africa up to 1200 years ago and in the 15th century, such as those discussed in Abu Laifa's book, The Boundless Sea? Are you familiar with this?
No, sorry.
Okay, all right. So a question about earlier Chinese based expeditions to East Africa, does that come into the project?
Well, it only serves like a very remote background, because for example, the Kenya girl that genetically identified as a descendant of Zheng He's fleet. So this is a case I used for the patrimonialization of heritage, and the patrimonialization of genetic heritage, and but it's quite a rare case, and it's, well, besides this case, we can only find evidences of like the traded goods on the Swahili coast, but these traded goods were actually intermediated by the Arabic traders, so it's not directly linked to China. So I would say I couldn't find any more connecting points of these Asian Chinese fleets in Africa to the current ones. These Chinese or the Zhenghe fleets, well, can be best understood as official historicizing narrative. Well, it may be true, it may be not true. It serves more a political purpose, not a real case that is like verifiable.
Yeah. We have a question from Huan Zhang, who's asking about the kind of peak time for Chinese migration to Madagascar and other African countries, and whether that relates, do early Chinese immigration to Africa, does that have any relationship to kind of the events of the Qing dynasty, for instance, the kind of impact of the sort of foreign incursions into China during that period?
Yes, it is. It belongs to a wider history of the export of Chinese indentured laborers from mostly from South China in late Qing dynasty to mostly to the so-called golden mines, for example, in Melbourne, then in San Francisco, and then also some Caribbean islands, and then including the Indian Ocean ones. The reason why we wanted to study this Indian Ocean old migrant societies is because they are actually part of this history, but they are kind of forgotten. And but they do have impact on the current ongoing China-African relations.
Great, yeah. Yeah, so it has a kind of contemporary relevance. You can completely imagine in the kind of current context why that would be. There's a question from Lo Tan asking, did the migrants to Africa come directly from China or via Southeast Asia?
Some of them came directly from China, because they were exported. So they exported by French or British or even Portuguese companies. So but most of these people, this labor, they went back to China. But some remained, but most of them they went back to China directly. For the remaining ones, for example, those buried in Tanzania now, so they were forgotten. And there are a few people, like I said, so there is a possible link, but not conclusive. We don't have direct evidence yet. So they migrated from South China to Southeast Asia, mainly Malay Peninsula. Then they further to Mauritius. Then from Mauritius, they separate again, because Mauritius, from Malay Peninsula, you can find another route to Australia, to north of Australia too. So it's possible they are linked, because they all belong to the British world system. So, but we don't have the direct evidence, but it's also not our focal point. So,
a potential future project, maybe. Yeah. Sorry, I missed this question earlier from Chris Su. That's another great one. Chris says, I found this presentation very interesting. I come from the Indian Ocean, Australian territory of Christmas Island, which is about 60% Chinese in population, neighbors to Mauritius and Madagascar. I have a question. Did many of the Madagascar Chinese convert to Christianity or another religion? Why did they not continue the annual observations of Qingming and the Ghost Festival? Yeah,
Christmas Island in somehow it's really neighbors to Mauritius and Madagascar. So yes, many of them they converted to Catholic faith, because it's the dominating faith on the island. And however, they do observe Qingming and the Ghost Festival and some local Cantonese festival, and they worship Guangdong too. So like what the Mauritius Chinese did. So it's like a dual track of face. So to integrate into the local people, they will have to hold the Catholic faith, but they still keep the tradition, especially in the older generations. These Chinese festivals until now, they have like annual gatherings. And so in this gathering, well, you can see, well, it's really magnificent. Well, you can see the older ones, well, you can see the mixed ones, and you can see the complete Africanized Chinese. They don't have a Chinese look at all, and they don't speak, but they recognize them. Now I'm one of the family temple, so I come here.
Yeah, fascinating. I think we'll probably leave it there unless anyone wants to put any other questions in the chat. I actually, sorry, if no one else, I have one more quick question about, I find this kind of museological element quite interesting as well. I'm wondering what kind of material culture, what's included in these exhibitions? Is it objects? Is it testimony?
Yeah, so for our part, so well, it's a huge project. So for our part, it's mainly the informations of the prominent Cantonese migrants, for example. What they are more interested into the elite class, but I saw from the from a bottom perspective. So, for example, they went to they came to Australia too. So, but they were more interested in the, for example, the head of the Cantonese Association in Sydney, for example. He came from that city too. So, so that's what they are exhibiting in the museum. So we have this global migrating network and these famous people, blah, blah, blah.
So much more room for an exploration of a kind of grassroots perspective.
Yeah.
Thank you, Xuefei, for a really interesting talk. I also want to thank, in particular, extend thanks to people who asked questions and gave comments about their own heritage. I always find that such a fascinating element of when we have these talks relating to the Chinese diaspora. So thank you, Xuefei. Thank you for everyone for attending today. And the link, I've sent out to everyone the link for Xuefei's next talk at the University of Melbourne. So please do put that in your calendars. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.